Okay, so welcome to the third of the EU discussion series talk. We are going to be talking about the ordinary legislative procedure, but we start with answering a question that they put to me last week about the EU budget. And I have just, did I give you one? Right?
No.
Yeah. So you were asking how much money, what's the budget, and the budget is 1 trillion. I always hesitate with the because yes, that's in millions, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but in current prices, that is the EU budget. The budget, this is the budget for the, again, for the 2014-2020 period. We work in 7-year multi-annual financial framework. And in the document that I have just distributed and that will be available for people looking at this remote, you will also see the figures for 2014. So we're not going to go into great detail because that's not the subject of the talk today, but just so that you know. And perhaps I can point out that the part of the budget that is my part of the budget is the first heading, which is smart and inclusive growth. It's not small, it's a big budget. That is the part of the budget that so my Director General in particular deals with. Now, I just wanted to show to you another slide. So here you see a little bit the percentage, how the budget is distributed within the various headings. Let me just now go to this one. Yeah, this one. Effectiveness for growth and jobs. I work in the space sector, and the space sector is covered under the second line, which is large infrastructure projects. And those are, that subheading is the one that covers the Copernicus program, the Earth Observation program, and the Galileo program, which is the part of the European Commission where I work. And we'll be talking about those programs next week in the CSTPR talk. So, talking about all that, which I believe is quite relevant for the sort of work that you do, because a lot of the work done with our Earth observation infrastructure is climate change, environmental applications. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to show to you is this one. There was a question last week about gender distribution. In this page, what you see is a distribution age and gender. It gives you an idea of the age pyramid within the Commission. And as you can see, you can see the distribution. Now, this is interesting. But not perhaps so much as this one, which is the distribution by country, because perhaps too much information, But gender grade. This is more significant and more relevant to the question that we put last week. Where are women in the structure of the commission? Now this is the overall. Now let me see if I can make this a bit smaller. Yeah. So in the right-hand side column, you see the totals, and in the left-hand side, you see the grades. Now, as you can imagine, the big bosses are at the top, and then it goes down to the lower grades. If you are curious and want to know where I fit in this, I am in the third line from the top. So I would be one of the how much? 420 80/14s that work in the institution. Now, this is interesting. More interesting is this one, because this one gives you the numbers for women and grade. And what you can see, looking also at the other table, you will see that although overall there is a fairly, there is a balance, figures are close, the percentages are close, as we saw in the very first page on overall distribution. What you see is that women are underrepresented in the top grades, and that's where managers are. So, and you will see that women are more numerous in the other grades. So, even though, go back to the first one, in this one, we see that women are actually more numerous. So there are 54.9% women with 5.1% men. So the more women than men working in the institution. The reality is that there is something that needs to be done when it comes to women representation, particularly at the higher grades and the grades that are responsible for management positions. So in the commission, those are commission papers. There's public information available on the web, and that's the truth about the gender balance within the institution. Okay, so that is just to address the issues that were raised last week. Do you have any questions on this? Okay.
Which country is doing the best and which is doing the worst? I can't really read the small print.
Me neither. We can look at it. It's hard to say because the figures are really small, difficult to read. One thing, if we look at totals, for example, in the 80 grades are the administrators are traditionally the university graduates, kind of the higher sort of ranking officials. There are clearly Belgium is the host country, and these are figures for Commission is a host country. So if you look at the column, for example, the totals, so this one, so you will see that Belgium has 1,320 AD officials, so the university graduates, which, if you consider the size of the country, Belgium is a small country, means that there is an overrepresentation, one would say, which is understandable, given the fact that the Commission is based in Brussels. I mean, we have staff all over the world, but of the 30,000 some Commission officials, 20,000 are based in Brussels. So, and then we can look, for example, at the UK. Where is the UK here? No. How come I don't see it? GDR. Yeah, that would be, no, that's Romania.
Well, there's Brexit, maybe.
Maybe they could delete it.
Well, that's interesting. I can't see it.
From January 2006.
No, but this is exactly, but it's strange that should be there.
It is in GBR, it's ROE.
Do you see what? GBR, exactly.
Okay.
That's, I must say that that's a funny, normally it's not GBR, it's the UK. Great Britain is an island, and the country is the United Kingdom. Well, for example, you see that the UK, you have 674 AD officials, which is, perhaps not as high a figure as one would expect. UK has a size similar to, in terms of population, France or Italy. Both France and Italy have over 1,300 AD officials, and the UK has practically half of that figure. That's interesting. So that says something about perhaps the attractiveness of European institutions for UK graduates. Now, why is this so? We can only speculate. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we move on to the presentation. This one? Yeah. So, kind of a dry subject, but I think that it's important to understand how the institutions work, particularly how this ordinary legislative procedure works. We showed this slide last week. This is the types of legislation, regulation, which is directly applicable, directive that needs to be transposed into national legislation, decisions that are addressed to individuals or member states, and they are binding in their entirety. And then recommendations or opinions which have no binding force. I think that the fact that the EU does adopt legislation with binding force makes it different from many intergovernmental organizations. Like in the UN, I mean, you have resolutions, they have a high political value, but they don't necessarily apply, they don't translate into a national law. That's not the case in the EU. Regulations, directives, decisions become the law, and the EU law has preeminence over national law. So member states have agreed to confer upon the EU the capacity to legislate, and in doing that, they're saying, well, when the EU legislates, the EU law has preeminence. Now, in our work, legal basis, namely, from what part of the treaty are we taking the basis for a piece of legislation is a constant discussion. In some cases, it's very clear. You have an article in the treaty that says, well, do this or that in this area, agriculture or energy or any area in which the Commission has competence, the Union has competence, and the Commission has the competence to legislate in. In other cases, it's not so clear-cut. It's not so clear-cut. That happens, for example, with space. Space activities, we have one article, which is Article 189, and okay, when it comes to space activities, not so crystal clear that they are covered by Article 189 in some cases, and I have personal experience with that. So, in most cases, the treaty is extremely clear as to what we can do in terms of legislation and the processes that need to be followed, because the articles in the treaty would say which procedure applies, and as the slide says, the great majority of EU legislation is adopted using the ordinary legislative procedure. There are other procedures, but we're just going to talk about this one because it's the most prominent one. And in this procedure, Parliament and Council share legislative power. This might seem odd because Council is the place where member states' governments are represented, and government is not part of the legislative, is not the legislative branch in member states, but at European Union level, they are. Council plays a role in legislation, and in fact, it has always been the legislator. The Parliament's role as co-legislator has grown over time, whereas Council from the beginning was there as the legislator. With the evolution of the treaties, Parliament's role has been increased and is now co-legislator in most procedures together with the Council. Now, any piece of legislation starts with the Commission submitting a legislative proposal to Parliament and Council. We already talked about this, is the right of initiative. It's only the Commission that can put forward a proposal. It can do it acting on its own, or it might be prompted to do it by member states or by the European Parliament, but it's ultimately the Commission's decision to put that proposal or not. We also have citizens' initiative, and we talked about, I think, in previous talks. In doing that, whenever the Commission decides to put forward a proposal or considers putting forward a proposal, there is a very intense consultation process. Everything begins talking to the people that might be affected by the proposal. Be it in the field of agriculture, environment, transport, marine resources, and so forth. This is a trend that's been reinforced throughout the years. We start with very extensive consultations before actually doing any work. So we get the view of those that are going to be affected by the legislative proposal. Yes, Max?
How often is that a contested process? How often do you feel as though there are certain interests or parties that aren't consulted? Do you think they do a good job of it, or is there other problems?
Well, I can use myself and the work, a piece of work that I did as an example in which the people that I sort of led the preparation of a proposal on the dissemination of high-resolution satellite imagery. And the driver for that was one particular member state was very interested in that piece of legislation. And within the Commission, we thought there was an area where the EU could intervene to create a framework that would facilitate the distribution of high-resolution imagery, which is potentially sensitive for security reasons. It was a very complicated proposal because it was about commercial distribution with security implications. It was a nightmare to try and explain where the boundaries between one and the other were. And you were asking about the consultation of stakeholders. By and large, there was support for the proposal, but not a very strong support from data providers and from companies, value-adding companies, companies that actually use Earth observation data to deliver products, mapping, or services, consultancy for urban planning, for agricultural purposes, and so forth. People feared that by bringing in EU regulation, their business would be made more difficult, rather than the opposite, which was our objective. And so the support was there, but not sufficiently strong to overcome the reluctance of some member states. And in the end, the Commission itself decided that's a prerogative of the Commission to withdraw the proposal. So after months of discussion, we took it as far. I will tell you when we go into the different steps of the procedure. I will tell you where we ended. But basically, at some point, the Commission decided, seeing that the discussion was, well, not going anywhere, is to say perhaps too much, but the Commission itself was not satisfied with the way things were going and decided to withdraw the proposal. And that was I have been responsible for other proposals, but that was the only one that failed. And in that case, I think that it failed in part because there was not sufficiently strong support from the businesses that this proposal was supposed to be helping. But again, this consultation process is very strong. I must say that sometimes when the political pressure from the top is very intense, and that political pressure may kind of sort of sideline a little bit the consultation process. There are things that are moved simply because top bosses, heads of state and government say we need to do this, and the Commission, acts upon it. There's always a consultation, but in some cases things might be rushed through because of it's politically important, and I think that the heads of government and heads of state decide that they can represent their public opinion in their respective countries, and that gives them the right to kind of push the political agenda, which is, I think, is completely true. Now, in the process, in the consultation process, at the moment the proposal is ready to be sent to Parliament and Council, national parliaments are consulted, as I said earlier in all the talks. Their main role is to see, and this is something that we were discussing before we started the talk, to see whether the EU is the appropriate level to do something. They may think, no, you shouldn't be doing this. This is for the national level, or perhaps local level, or regional level. So they are asked to give an opinion on whether proportionality and subsidiarity is being respected. And we have a system of yellow cards or orange cards, so that depending on how many national parliaments say this is not the right thing for the Commission to be doing, there will be a different course of action. So, yellow card, you may lead the Commission to maintain, amending, or withdraw the proposal. Orange cards a bit more complicated because the Commission then will have to justify its position, so it puts more pressure on the Commission to justify why it is keeping the proposal in front of Parliament and Council. So they do play an important role. And it's also important to mention that besides European Parliament and Council, there are advisory bodies that represent sort of groups of interest, including employers and workers in the Economic and Social Committee, and regions. Strong, they are important in Europe. They play an important role. The Committee of the Regions is also consulted. And in some of the cases, we have to consult some other bodies. So, first reading, okay. We have a procedure that can take up to 3 different readings. Most procedures end with the first reading. Most procedures, but it's not exceptional that we go to second and third reading. I mean, we're going to go through this. Commission proposal. You see the commission. This building that you can see right there. This is the emblematic building of the commission. This one, and that's where the headquarters of the commission are. And basically, the slide illustrates how suggestions, ideas for the Commission to put forward a proposal can come from different places, including citizens, as I mentioned earlier on. So once the Commission adopts decisions as a collegial body, so it's not an individual commissioner that is responsible for the proposal, it will be the Commission as a whole. So the 28 commissioners are responsible for any proposal put forward. Take climate change, we have a Spanish commissioner. Any proposal in that domain will be led by him, of course, but is adopted by the Commission as an institution. And by the way, in the consultation process that I was referring to earlier on, the inter-service consultation, so the discussion between different departments in the Commission, is also extremely important. It's an exercise that can never be taken very lightly. Give you an example. Our colleagues in the environment would want to issue legislation that may have an impact on the way industry works. But I can tell you there are very strong discussions between colleagues in this particular DG and my DG, which is supposed to be defending industry interests. So there is always a tension, and it's a real discussion. It's not kind of a protocol or diplomatic. No, I mean we have heated debates as to what goes or doesn't go, and at the end of the day, a proposal only goes out once every single department has agreed to it, and there are no sort of ways around it. And if people at my level cannot agree, so the officials working in the actual drafting of the proposal, then it goes up to cabinet level, so the people, the staff, the commissioner staff would intervene, and the final discussion may take place at that level. Ultimately, it's commissioners themselves that may have a discussion. That happens in rare cases, particularly sensitive proposals. Commissioners themselves may actually have to have a discussion on it. That is very rare. We have written procedure and oral procedure. Written procedure means that everything has been sorted out by the time a proposal reaches the college. Oral procedure means that there has to be a discussion. So the oral procedure is fairly uncommon. The written procedure, everything has been sorted out at lower level, is much more common.
Question.
Yeah.
Are you talking about proposals generated just within the EU, or is this applied to all proposals? For example, the Paris Agreement, an external. Does that enter into the same process?
No, I mean, in a way, yes. Whenever we conclude an international agreement, so the EU signs an international agreement, there is a certain procedure which is not this one. It's not this one, but it's very similar in many ways. Is it still the Commission that is going to table a proposal to negotiate first and then to conclude? So it will be the Commission saying we need to negotiate. So it will propose what we call an authorization to negotiate to Council, and then a decision to conclude to Council. In international agreements, the European Parliament gives its opinion, but does not co-legislate. It doesn't participate in the process in the same way as I'm about to describe here. For obvious reasons, I would say, you cannot have a big discussion. I mean, only so many people can participate in a negotiation. And the negotiation is between one entity, in this particular case, the European Union, and a third party, or third parties. And the Commission will be, for matters that concern its area of competence, climate is one of them, environment is one of them, it will be the Commission representing the European Union. So it's the Commission that negotiates on behalf of the European Union. Member States, Council, participates actively, follows, it's informed, and they have a say in what is being negotiated. And Parliament will have a say at the end of the process on what has been negotiated. We'll have a say, but not have an input, will not suggest amendments and so forth. That doesn't mean that there isn't a dialogue and the Parliament cannot influence the discussion. They can. Informally, there is a lot that can be done. Politically, there is a lot that can be done. But formally speaking, the procedure is different. Okay? So anyway, the proposal goes to Parliament and Council, and they work in a certain order. So first is Parliament. I mean, they work in parallel up to a certain point, but there is a certain order. There is a committee that is given the responsibility of the proposal, so say the Economic and Financial Affairs Committee or another committee will designate a rapporteur, will be a member of Parliament, and this person will be the one that will be leading the discussion in Parliament on the proposal. There might be other committees associated to the discussion depending on the nature of the proposal. For example, in the case I was referring to, my own proposal, the leading committee was the one that deals with research, but there was an associated committee which is the one that deals with internal market, because there were internal market implications to the proposal that I was doing. So, goes to Parliament, committee has a discussion, the discussion then is taken to from the committee to the plenary, is voted. There is a resolution adopted stating whether Parliament approves or rejects the proposal or amends it. And if so, includes the proposal as amended and approved by the Parliament. Most often, I mean the vast majority of cases, the Parliament will amend, will make proposals for amendments in this procedure, and then Parliament sends the proposal with the suggested amendments to Council and Commission. So, Council turn. So the Council has its own discussion, but at some point it gets the Parliament's resolution. Without going into too much detail, so there is a working group, and that goes so through the different levels of Council. But basically, at the end of the day, what the Council as an institution does is it says, I don't want to accept any of the Parliament's amendment, but I like the Commission proposal as it is, and there's a the Council adopts a position, and that means the Commission proposal is adopted. So the Council can completely ignore, but in that case it cannot change the Commission proposal itself, and this is very rare. This is very rare. What the Council will do is that it will suggest amendments to the Commission proposal. it can say, yeah, I agree with all the European Parliament's amendments. That is the same. If it decides to accept all Parliament amendments, that means adoption. It could reject the proposal as a whole, although this is not explicit in the treaty. The treaty doesn't provide for this, but it's an obvious, I would say, course of action as well. The Council does not adopt all Parliament's amendment and introduces its own changes. So this will be the initial approach. So in most cases, Council will say, yeah, we're happy with some amendments, not with all. We have our own amendments, and so they reach a first reading position. Now, I said earlier on that in fact many procedures end at the first reading. Why? Because while Parliament is looking at a proposal and Council is looking at a proposal, waiting for Parliament to produce its resolution, they talk to each other. So we officials, myself, plus in my case, plus representative from the committees in charge of the proposal in Parliament, in contact with the Presidency of Council, we will get together and discuss what is it that is acceptable for Council, and the other way around. What is it that Parliament is happy with regarding Council's position? So basically, the idea is to work together with Parliament so that when Parliament puts its amendments to the plenary session, and in order to adopt a resolution with amendments to the Commission proposal, those amendments can be accepted by Council. And if that is the case, then Council will adopt all Parliament's amendments and the proposal will be adopted. So we will be in the situation of EP amends, the B point, European Parliament amends, Council approve all amendments, adoption. That is quite often the case. But it might not be the case. Difficult proposals is not the case. Parliament can have strong views about certain things and not necessarily coincide with the views of Council. So if we end up with a first reading position by Council which does not take on board all Parliament amendments, we enter into the second reading. You see that there are deadlines for the second reading. So it's not that Parliament can take forever to do certain things. The European Parliament has 3, possibly 4 months to examine Council's position. So the Council position goes to the committee that was dealing with the proposal in the first place. This committee prepares a recommendation for Parliament's second reading. It goes to the plenary of the European Parliament, and there are 4 possible outcomes. The Parliament approves the Council position, in which case everyone is happy. The Parliament fails to take a decision within a time limit, which means that the proposal is adopted as per Council's first reading. A third possible outcome is that Parliament rejects Council's first reading position, in which case the Act is not adopted and the procedure is ended. In that case, that's the end of the proposal. More often, what you would have is Parliament propose amendments to the Council first reading. So Council said, I don't like all your amendments, but I am suggesting these ones. Parliament said, oh, okay, that's the way you see it, but this is the way we see it. So we take your proposal and we are going to change it a little bit, and this is what we are going to put forward as our position on the second reading. And that can happen. So that was Parliament. That Parliament position goes back to Council, which again has 3 to 4 months to examine Parliament's second reading, And again, yeah, we can approve all amendments, and then everyone is happy again. Or it does not approve all amendments, and in this case, we enter a phase which we call conciliation. Conciliation committee. It is not uncommon. And normally this happens when you reach an agreement over practically everything, but there might be one or two big outstanding issues. Might be more, but it's generally really that thing that really stuck in the way of an agreement. So that one thing might provoke a conciliation committee, and that is kind of the sort of the summit of the process. So in conciliation, so within 6 weeks we get to that point. 6 to 8 weeks, the council refuses of adoption to adopt Parliament's second reading position. So the council still says, no, I don't agree with this. Then we need to convene the conciliation committee. So the presidents of the council and the European Parliament convene conciliation committee with equal members from both sides. The Commission, of course, participates, and this committee has 6 to 8 weeks to decide on a joint text. And if there is no joint text, the proposal is dead. If the conciliation committee approves a joint text, then you go into the third reading. That means that the solution has been found. The third reading is basically the end of the process. If the conciliation committee finds a solution, the third reading is kind of almost a rubber stamping. I mean, you still have to go to plenary, you have to make sure that the plenary approves, but the work would have been done to make sure that that is the case. The work through political groups would have been done to ensure that that is the case. In my recent experience, we had a problem with one clause of our space programs that concern, it's a bit technical, that concern the contracting authority. There's no easy way to explain this, but basically there was a discussion between member states and council, commission, parliament as to whether for our Earth observation programs the contracting authority should be commissioned or should be delegated to the European Space Agency. That was a major stumbling block. The Commission wanted to keep the contracting authority for itself. Member states wanted that to be delegated to ESA, and we're talking about the big member states, which happen to be members of the European Union and members of the European Space Agency, and they are the ones that have the greatest stake in space activities anyway. So there was a big discussion. The Commission made it an issue of principle, so that thing reached, practically the end of the procedure. In the end, the solution was found, as it is often the case. I would say that 99% of cases, a solution tends to be found in this conciliation committee. Personally, I don't know of any particular case where a solution was not found. There might be some, but they're really unlikely. So this is really the end of the procedure. At that point, everyone is happy. The text goes to council, the text goes to parliament, and unless something really unexpected comes up, the proposal is adopted. So basically, what you have here, there is a joint text, and it goes both to parliament and council. And again, there is a certain deadline to do these things. If one of the institutions rejected or does not respond in time, it's another thing, the legislation fails and the procedure is ended. And it can only start again if the Commission submits another proposal. Now, one important thing in this whole process is that the Commission can at any time decide, I don't want to go on with the discussion anymore, I don't like the way it's going, this is not what I wanted in the first place, I withdraw the proposal. So the Commission can do that at any time. Doesn't do that often, but is entitled to do it. And it has done so. So, for example, proposes a proposal for a program with a certain budget, and in the discussion, it begins to show that it's not going to get anywhere near the budget that he wanted for that particular activity, and said, well, if you give me a third of what I asked for, I mean, I can't do the same thing. I mean, I cannot do with 30 what I said I would do with 100. You seem to be saying that you won't give me 100. Take this back. And that happens. So is what we call, what's the expression in English? Denaturalize the proposal. So if the discussion in general happens in council, Parliament is quite supportive of Commission most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. And but if the discussion denaturalized the Commission proposal, the Commission will take it away. So, yeah, that's basically the final outcome. In the presentation, I have a kind of a summary of the different steps. It's an interesting process. It's an interesting process. Those that participate in it, appreciate the sort of political game that is always involved, and you have 20 member states in council. You have members of parliament from also 20 member states, plus a host of different political parties. So there are many different opinions and things at stake that make the work extremely interesting. You have to basically juggle with all that to arrive at compromises. So that's the end of the presentation. Any questions? Yeah. Please, go ahead.
So if the act gets adopted and it conflicts with some particular member state's law, it doesn't supersede that then, or is that
yes,
worked out beforehand? Does that typically happen?
Well, if EU law supersedes national law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, member states, a great deal of, the discussion in council is about how does that, what I do in my country relates to what the Commission is suggesting. And you have a bunch of experts looking at this proposal with a magnifying glass to see what implications the proposal, once it becomes law, will have for the country in question. So they will go on to say, things like you say, we'll go and check national legislation. What does our national legislation say about it, if there is national legislation on that particular issue? And they will, of course, try to steer the discussion according to their interests. So, say agriculture, rules of origin, wine producing sort of regulation on wine producing. This is common. That would be typically something that the Commission would, okay, we found out, there is legislation for the last 50 years, but they have discovered that now, okay, there is an issue with this or that, and we need to come out with a regulation that has that or that effect. The way you, animal welfare, for example, which is a relatively new thing. The Commission can legislate on that. And so member states will look at that and will say, well, that will affect my pig farmers in such a way. I don't want this, I don't want that. That would be production more expensive, and that would be damaging, and blah, blah. So, yeah. So member states in that discussion, and MEPs as well, of course, they will see what the situation is in the member states, knowing that once that regulation becomes law, it will supersede whatever legislation is in force in the country question. Then Jessica, please.
I wanted to go back to one of the, I think in the first reading, there was a word mentioned trilogues.
Yeah.
In these informal meetings. I'm just kind of curious about what takes place in those meetings and how, so I think about a dialogue as being difficult enough, a trilogue sounds like it might be even trickier. And so are there procedures in place to lead that discussion or?
Yes, there are certain protocols in place, in some cases non-written, in some cases written. The trilogue, like you see, informal meetings. So they are informal meetings, but they are extremely important informal meetings. They are trialogues because this is about commission. I come with my proposal, and the commission is constantly on the spot because the commission is, can the commission explain why this is so? Can the commission give us reassurances that this is going to be, can the commission explain what's the connection between this proposal and another piece of legislation? Remember that the commission is the one proposing this, so we as commission officers will always on the spot. Then you have parliament, and then you have council, and each one will defend its point of view. I mean, council will be represented by presidency, and the presidency will try to do its best to represent the collective views in council. So we'll sort of have a debate in council. There is no unanimity yet, and it's not required. We have qualified majority for most cases, but we will try to represent as ably as possible the position in council. And parliament will do the same, and parliament will try to convey what it perceives as being the position to be defended. And like you say, a dialogue is difficult enough, but I think trialogue formula works pretty well. It works pretty well. The commission in this business is the honest broker, is the institution that has to, do whatever it can without sort of jeopardizing the objective of the proposal, bring together the positions of council and parliament. Yeah. So, and their informal meetings, very interesting. They generally happen in a very sort of amicable atmosphere, and yes, interesting exercise, compromise. Yes, but
I was wondering if the treaties limit the commission to certain areas of legislation and reserve other areas to the nation states. Like, for example, in this country, typically family law issues are reserved to the state and not to Congress. So are there any topical areas like that the commission is not really supposed to be meddling in?
absolutely. That was something that we touched upon in the first talk.
Okay.
There are three types of competence. So the EU member states confer upon the Union three types of competence. Exclusive competence, that is an area where only the EU can legislate, not member states. Typical example, trade, foreign trade. We are an economic bloc. We cannot have member states negotiating individual agreements with third countries. It is the Union that has the exclusive competence to negotiate trade agreements. The list is longer. Marine resources, that's another area where the EU has exclusive competence, and there are some more. Then we have what we call shared competence. Shared competence are those where member states can legislate and do legislate, but once the Union decides that it's appropriate for the Union to get into it, that Union intervention prevents member states from acting. The Union takes over. Transportation is one area of shared competence. So, and the list is quite long. So, shared competence is the longer list of competence. And then, in that area of shared competence, we have two kind of different from the other, two kind of ad hoc so shared competence. One is in space. In space, European Union intervention does not prevent member states from exercising their competence. And the other one is development. Development is also an area where the Union can do whatever it considers appropriate, but member states can do something on their own if they so wish. And then you have what we call support competence. Competence to adopt support action. Education is typically a domain where the Union has no competence of its own, so we cannot do anything, we cannot legislate in the field of education, but we can have programs, and we do have programs, in support of cooperation in the field of education. And I worked in that area for 30 years. So we have a big program, big student exchange program. It's called Erasmus. You may have heard about it. That is a union program. Significant amount of money has not ceased to grow over the years, and that is typically support action from the union. So we do not do anything to member states' legislation, but we help to improve education through these sort of cooperation programs. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you so much for your attention, and see you
And
next time
Next,
for the...
next Wednesday, we're
Oh,
not
sorry.
having one of the EU seminars.